started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning, this afternoon, this evening. We've got folks from all over the globe here. So whatever time it is, welcome and thank you for joining us. This is the third in our series of webinars on LoRaWAN wireless technology. Our objective today is to share a high-level view on how LoRaWAN can improve pharmaceutical operations and compliance. The audience is really anyone involved in pharmaceuticals, but our pharmaceutical manufacturing, with a special lean towards maintenance folks, engineering, purchasing, really anyone that would help in the assessment and requisition of a system like this, a LoRaWAN wireless system. So let's preview what we're going to talk about today. Here's our agenda. We're going to talk about the importance of pharmaceutical environmental monitoring. If you're on this webinar, you probably have a good sense of that and may even live it every day. And that's with LoRaWAN. Without it, it's important, and we'll just reiterate that briefly. We'll talk about what is LoRaWAN, just a quick overview of that to make sure we're all on the same starting point here with understanding LoRaWAN. We'll talk about advantages of LoRaWAN technology in pharmaceutical applications, so what it does bring to the table. We have a few example applications, and then we'll talk about compliance, which is really one of the strong points for LoRaWAN, and one of its inherent strengths is the way that it can help companies comply with the myriad of standards and regulations out there. We'll talk about the platform, which is a key part of that compliance, and then we'll just touch on a case study, a customer case study, move into a summary, and then straight to Q&A. So as far as environmental monitoring in pharma, it's crucial, it's critical. Pharma is one of the most heavily regulated industries in the world for good reason, protecting not only consumers and patients, but the companies themselves. Lapses in compliance costs companies dearly, on the order of $6 billion a year in the U.S. alone in financial penalties. So preventing and addressing possible process deviations, environmental deviations, is an important part of that protective umbrella. The need for monitoring has different drivers based on where one is in time. So whether it's in the past where you're trying to resolve an issue that's already concerned, maybe you have a product quality issue, maybe you're dealing with a recall or some sort of liability, that documentation and audit trail is very important to prove that, or to find the problem or prove that there was no problem in the manufacturing process. There's the present, where you're trying to ensure that and maintain precision and safety for your employees. And then looking ahead, it's preventative. You want to avoid future contamination. You want to ensure product stability and integrity. And that environmental monitoring is a key piece of that. And hopefully LoRaWAN can be a key piece of that monitoring. So let's take a look at what LoRaWAN is. But before I get into that, I just want to, you may see, depending on where you're at in your journey here with LoRaWAN, you may see LoRa, you may see LoRaWAN. They're really not used a lot interchangeably because there is a fundamental difference. LoRa is the actual signal modulation that's employed. It was created by a company by the name of Semtech, I think in 2012. So it's not super old, but it's not just within the last year either. So that's all about that physical signal modulation, which is a key part of why LoRaWAN can travel so much further than other signals. Its range is so much more extended, and we'll touch on that in a second. LoRaWAN is if you're familiar with the OSI model that's shown there in the bottom left, is the second and third layers having to do with standardizing of addressing, formatting, and security. And that really helps with, and they expect it to be adopted, that nobody's able to work together. The sensors don't work with a gateway, or you have to buy a very particular one in order to get it to work. So LoRaWAN brings that all together and makes it commercially viable. So that's the difference between LoRa and LoRaWAN. And then shifting our attention over to the right on your screen, that's a simple network overview of a LoRaWAN end-to-end solution. There are four key elements. The first is sensors, and those are that's the hardware that provides temperature, pressure, level, humidity, you name it. I've seen 35 different parameters that can be measured with LoRaWAN right now, and it seems like that grows every week. The sensors will also add metadata like battery level and signal strength, and then they transmit it up to 10 miles to a LoRaWAN gateway. And the LoRaWAN gateway receives those LoRa signals. So I am using LoRa there because it's a LoRa signal, and it can process from multiple devices. And when I say multiple, it's not 5 or 10. A sub $1,000 gateway can handle thousands of devices simultaneously. So these are sophisticated pieces of equipment, and their job is to convert those LoRa packets to IP packets. And once you're in an IP packet format, the sky's the limit. You can use what's called a backhaul network. That gateway would be hooked up to Wi-Fi, Ethernet, or cellular, and you can go anywhere in the world on the regular internet that we all use in business and in our homes. The gateway also adds a few other pieces of data that are important, like the gateway ID. It'll attach signal strength information as well as a timestamp. So important element there with the gateway, and from there it goes up to the cloud, to the network server, and that's the brains of the operation. It handles device registration. You want to add a new sensor, that network server is going to say, yes, it belongs, it's clear. I know that that's an authentic sensor that belongs to my company or this company. It removes duplicate messages. Sometimes you'll have a sensor that's within range of two different gateways. Both will receive the same packet, and that network server has to know which one to use. By the way, that's decided based on the signal strength, and which one not to use. So it won't duplicate messages, no issue with that. It handles encryption, decryption, and delivers the data then to where the rubber meets the road at that application server, which we've got a picture of a laptop there. Could be a phone, could be anything, anywhere where you access the internet, that can be your application server. That handles data aggregation. So it's taking all that sensor data and aggregating it within the platform. It stores that data, and it also renders visualizations, graphs, and things like that for interpretation. Very interestingly, too, you can add devices and manage devices on that platform. You can change the intervals. We'll talk more about intervals in a second. You can set notifications up. There's a lot of different things you can do there, and up to including exporting your data. A lot of the platforms will. You don't have to export the data, but you can to Excel spreadsheet, for example. So just a quick note here, we're talking about a private network when we look at this graphic. There is such a thing as public networks that are really centered around urban areas in the United States, is where you get a lot of density in public networks. And that would take the place, the gateway and the network server would then be publicly shared. The nice part about those is as an installer or as a utility, for example, in an urban area, you just have to install the sensor, and then you contract with the gateway and a network server folks, and you're off to the races. Very large scale deployments in those cases. So now that we know the how, let's look at what makes LoRaWAN different and in many respects better than other wireless protocols. So before I dive into this, and there's a lot going on in this slide, before I dive in, LoRaWAN has a projected compound annual growth rate of 40% for the next 10 years. It's average 40% over the next 10 years of growth, which is absolutely phenomenal for a non-consumer product. We always see these consumer products that just take off like fire, and will double or maybe even triple revenue year over year for several years as they catch on. That's less typical, and it's very rare actually in a business sense to grow at that rate. And LoRaWAN's projected to add 40 to 50% every year to the number of sensors, to the revenue, that sort of thing, in the global marketplace. So obviously it's bringing something, and that's I wanted to preface the somethings that it brings with that, because it is borne out by the stampede of folks that are adopting. So starting to the left, the range. Range is one of the biggest, most fundamental advantages of LoRaWAN. Exceptionally reliable at long ranges, but that is one of the big ones. And if you can get in your mind up to 10 miles in rural areas, we'll compare it to some other ones here in a second. We have a battery life on LoRaWAN sensors measured in years. 5 to 10 years is not unusual. So you may install it and be retired by the next time it needs a battery replacement. And those are commercially available batteries. They're not specialized in any way. It's scalable. The scalability, once you've installed an initial, maybe a pilot setup, and you have sensors in a gateway, as long as you place the next sensor within range of that gateway, that's all the work that needs to be done, is adding that sensor to the platform, where you're going to receive the data, and physically installing it and turning it on, and going through a join sequence. So super scalable. And the fact that sub $1,000 gateways can handle thousands of sensors means that you're not going to run out of gateway space. The platform is inherently compliant, and I'll get into more about what I mean by inherently compliant with many of the requirements of pharmaceutical, the standards for pharmaceuticals. And the security is AES 128, which is the standard in financial transactions and network security. So checking a lot of boxes there specifically for pharma. Installation, very simple. It may not be plug and play, but it's in the neighborhood of plug and play. Many manufacturers will provide pre-provisioned gateways so that when you turn a sensor on, the gateway recognizes the sensor, talks to the sensor, and also knows which network server to address the packets to. And 5, 10, 15 minutes would be plenty to install a sensor in that scenario. So I know we provide pre-provisioned gateways, and many of our competitors do as well. One other note on installation, really, because it's wireless, very limited, if any, facility modification. There's no wires to run, no holes to punch in, walls to get those wires through. And in most instances, no IT resources required. And that's probably a good point to bring up, is that many companies have strict firewall rules. IT, there's a lot of downside to any kind of hacking at a company, so they've built some very strong walls. We can work through those walls with the assistance of IT, or I think it's $1 or $2 per month per sensor. You can actually work around it just by going on a cellular backhaul. So that is an option in order to avoid that IT juggernaut that exists in some companies. And then finally, low cost. And we'll talk a little bit more about cost here later, but hardware, software, initial installation, expansion, they're all very low relative to other technologies. So you got a simple and affordable solution overall with a long range and a long battery life, inherent compliance, and the ability to easily and cost effectively grow. I mean, what's not to like, right? And then just a note here, I put the graph down here of the adoption life cycle. We believe we're right here in the early adopter stage, maybe mid-early adopter stage. And what the benefit to anybody buying right now is that many of the bugs have been worked out. I mean, this technology has been around for over 10 years. So those innovators and everything that like to be on the cutting edge, but sometimes also act as guinea pigs, that stage is over. LoRaWAN's well established and ready to make further inroads in industries where it hasn't before. So let's take a real quick look at that range that I mentioned. Just various technologies starting on the bottom left here. You've got Bluetooth, which is more or less a room scale wireless technology. You've got Wi-Fi, which you might consider a wing or a small building. I know I've been in larger buildings where you had to have multiple Wi-Fi routers in order to access the internet. Zigbee, it's building level, maybe 1,000-foot range. Something called frequency shift keying, and that's a little less than 1K. So those are the other WAN wireless protocols. And then you get up to LoRa, and it's an order of magnitude higher than any of those, or longer range than any of those, with 10 mile. Now I put city just because it's like city scale, but just caveat there, it doesn't mean it's 10 miles in a city. It's more like 2 to 3 miles in the city, just because of the noise floor is higher in an urban environment. So just mentioning the noise, it's really neat. A part of LoRa, and one of the things that allows it to have such a range, is the fact that it can actually operate below the noise floor. It can operate down to negative 20 decibels signal to noise ratio. And what that means is, or I guess an analogy to that is, if you were at a party, a loud party, and you're on one side of the room and your friend's on the other side of the room, and basically you're whispering and they can hear you over all the party noise. That's what LoRa brings to the table. So where is this tech being used in pharma? There are a lot of potential applications. There's just a few listed up here that we've seen as the most popular in pharmaceutical production, storage, those sorts of applications. Clean room monitoring, cold storage, cold chain auditing, even facility security, raw material monitoring. You can see what's on the screen there, but the bottom line is, if you can measure it, more than likely there's a LoRaWAN sensor that can measure it, that is out there that can do it for you as well. There's one other part that's in the bottom right that a lot of people don't think about, that we've seen some success in, is equipment monitoring, and particularly aftermarket equipment monitoring. If you had a pump or an air handler, or just any large piece of equipment, large expensive piece of equipment that kind of go hand in hand, you can install a LoRaWAN sensor on there, just a single one, to take 3 variables, for example, vibration, current draw, temperature, and instead of replacing an entire drive on that piece of equipment because you didn't know it was about to fail, maybe you're installing just a bearing, a $100 bearing instead of a $10,000 drive. So we've seen a lot of good things out of that equipment monitoring sector, and I think that's going to really take off, particularly in the aftermarket, but even OEMs installing that as a way to track their equipment. So LoRaWAN's interesting, but why pharma? Well, in one image, that chart, the plethora of overlapping standards. When a company introduces a new drug, most times the intent is not just to sell it in the United States, which would have enough regulation, but also internationally in Europe. So you have these companies that are buried, and there's good reason for those regulations and standards, but they're just buried in the requirements for compliance. So one thing LoRaWAN can do is sort of consolidate some of the environmental monitoring requirements into a single package. And I put that picture on the left because that's a differential pressure sensor. It's an external remote temperature sensor, and it's a humidity / local temperature sensor. So there's 4 different readings being taken place in a single sensor that then can be routed to the platform on a regular basis and trended, monitored for any kind of notification requirement when it exceeds limits, user set limits, that sort of thing. So the important thing is that platform that helps with compliance, drastically helps with compliance on these regulations. So when we talk about all of those, it's nice to kind of center in on, I've circled some that apply across the board on FDA 21 CFR Part 11, that right side column. And that has to do with the integrity of your software collection. So just to spend a moment here, the requirement is for tamper-proof electronic records. You need an audit trail. You need access control. Just not anybody off the street can access the data. You need data encryption, at that AES 128 level. Compliance alerts, be alerted when the environment that you're monitoring goes out of its limit. And then SCADA / building management system integration. And LoRaWAN inherently does that because you have to go into a platform, and most platforms that we've seen check these boxes and do this at a minimum, and then other things as well that are conducive to a good compliance regimen. So it's almost tailor-made for it. So let's talk about one big caveat that I haven't mentioned when it comes to LoRaWAN. LoRaWAN is a periodic measurement system, periodic data transmission system. So you might be used to sensors that have a continuous millisecond reading. As soon as the environment changes, as soon as that parameter changes, that's going to be transmitted through the wire to the control system. And if it's a closed loop control system, something's going to happen. Something's going to be changed. A valve's going to be opened, whatever. LoRaWAN's more on the order of very common to see 10-minute intervals. I've seen as little as 1-minute interval, and as much as once every 12-hour interval. So that's something that's adjustable by users, but it's also something to keep in mind. If you need instantaneous alerting or control, LoRaWAN's not a good fit. And that's if you needed for example, an immediate airflow adjustment based on particulate spiking in a clean room, that's not where you want LoRaWAN. However, it is good. It's great, actually. And what we've seen is one of the best approaches is that in critical areas, continue to use wired sensors, which typically already exist, as the primary source for real-time control. And then LoRaWAN sensors as a secondary stream for redundancy. It's nice to have that redundancy and compliance logging. So we found that to be a really strong approach, and many companies are doing just that. So here's what the platform looks like, because it is such an integral part of the reason we're here. Repeating that FDA 21 CFR Part 11, that's just from that chart. But you can see you can break down that audit trail and access control into various subcategories, I guess you could say, with activity logs, configuration changes, security events, and alerts all being logged and time-stamped and tamper-proof. I also have added just a typical log of the environmental conditions in the bottom left, and that you can see has the temperature. It's got a date and time stamp. It has the temperature, signal to noise ratio. You want to know how strong your signal is, along with what's called an RSSI, which is received signal strength indicator. You can export. You can actually see that in the upper right of that log. You can export to Excel if you wanted to manipulate it and graph it, or you had other needs. You can graph it in the platform. You can see that graph on the upper right. You can graph multiple variables at once for comparative purposes. You can also track against a map on multiple facilities and drill down into a facility, into a part of the facility, and right down into the sensor level. And then I did want to show you some alarms. Here's some alarms, just a screenshot of an example alarm. You can do this based on user-defined limits, which is what you're seeing here with these alarms. It'll also tell you when you're getting a low battery or if you lose communication. So these systems are pretty smart, and they're built to keep you up and running. So just on the case study, we have a customer that is in pharmaceutical manufacturing. Overall facility size is about 50,000 square feet. About a little less than 10% of that, 3,000 square feet, is clean rooms. And their objective in looking at LoRaWAN was to improve their monitoring and compliance and throw in a little bit of predictive maintenance once they started to get a good look at it. So in the clean room, they did that hybrid approach. They added LoRaWAN sensors to clean rooms as a redundant sensor, and then as a primary sensor in non-critical areas. And they did that predictive maintenance on I think it was 3 or 4 pieces of equipment with vibration and current sensors. So the output, the result of that was a 20% reduction in clean room time. They were able to trend and catch problems sooner. They didn't have to wait for an alarm. They could actually see the trend growing towards an alarm. And then they also, with the alerts, were able to reduce response times. So very quick response to those alarms, and then rectification of those. And then predictive maintenance costs decreased as well. And I mentioned it earlier, you're replacing a $100 bearing instead of a $10,000 drive. And it's a beautiful thing when you can get ahead of things like that. And then they improve their compliance, both the FDA and the 18644. And it's one of those times in life where you actually get an improvement and you reduce your costs, because they were doing some of this manually at the time. And we're able to take that manual part out of the equation. So that's a user that's very happy with their decision. And let's summarize what we've talked about, and we can get to Q&A. So the benefits, we touched on these, but one of the several of the key benefits listed here is the fact that it's wireless, scalable, and cost effective. With the system, you get trending and instant alerts. That's usually one of the biggest pluses for customers that are looking at the platforms. Inherent regulatory compliance, beautiful thing, and then reduced operational risks and costs associated with those risks. Takeaways, if you could take away anything about LoRaWAN, it would be that it really excels with long range, long battery life, and a compliant platform. It simplifies compliance, and the collection of data, parsing of data is very straightforward, very easy, and very accessible. It can be used in predictive maintenance. A lot of folks are new to that side of LoRaWAN. And it is best suited for that compliance logging and trend monitoring. It's not ideal for those real-time control loops. And then provides that redundancy that I mentioned in that case study, and we've seen that in several other places as well. So, Sabrina, do you have any questions for me?
It looks like I have a couple. For starters, what are the installation and maintenance costs of a LoRaWAN pharmaceutical monitoring system?
Yeah, good question, because I've said low cost several times, but really haven't honed in on that. It does vary. That's a totally unsatisfying answer, but I've seen, so if we just go leg by leg, I've seen sensors between 100 and 500 being the most common range. If you get something really specialized, I've seen up to 1,500, but let's just use that 100 to 500, because that's probably a 90% fit here. Gateways from $300 to $5,000. You get into that upper range, you're talking tens of thousands of sensors, and it's usually somebody that's on utility level. Maybe they're reading meters in a suburban or urban area. Subscriptions, that's an ongoing cost, and those are usually $5 to $100 per sensor per year, and that really depends heavily on the provider, number one, and just the volume. You're going to pay more per sensor if you have 5 sensors than if you have 500 sensors. So if you take that all together, and if I've done my math right, I'm just going to ballpark, that first year where you have the installation costs could be anywhere from $1,500 to $10,000. And in the second year, where all the installation, all the hardware costs seed into the background, you're looking more at as little as $50, believe it or not, to $1,000 for the subscription. And again, that depends on the number of sensors.
Thank you for that. I do have one other question if we have time for it.
Sure.
Can LoRaWAN be integrated with existing pharmaceutical monitoring platforms and systems?
Yeah. Actually, mentioned that earlier, and you can actually use the LoRaWAN network server to act as middleware. And if in the case of like an ERP, a business system, there's APIs available. And in the case of a building management system or a SCADA system, you'd be looking more like at an MQTT model. So yes, A has been done. B, there's actually, I've used the word platform. I'll use it differently here. That platform being the network server in this case, there's actually a platform ready to load and act as the middleware for that integration. So just one caveat on that, complex applications may require a separate middleware outside of what is on the LoRa network server. So, but yeah, it's done all the time. Anything else,
Okay.
Sabrina?
As of right now, that's all the questions we have.
Okay, all right. Well, I want to thank everyone for attending. We really appreciate it. We love to share the gospel on LoRaWAN and the possibilities that lay before us, changing a lot of the world with this technology. If you ever have any questions, our number and email and web address are at the bottom left. Please just reach out. We'll be happy to talk to you. And if you have time and you're available, we'd love to have you at the next webinar, which is a little over a month from now, February 19th, same time. And we'll be talking about LoRaWAN in dust collection. So again, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day wherever you are, and look forward to talking to you. Take care.